Hey, aloha mai kako. Welcome to the 17th installment of the Kale Mouse Center for Sustainable Island Food Systems Brown Bag Speaker Series. I want to mahalo everyone for joining us today as we turn our focus to a critical and often overlooked piece of Hawaii's agri-food landscape, meat processing infrastructure, and the future of livestock harvesting in our islands. My name is Ioane, and on behalf of the center, I extend our gratitude to today's speakers and attendees for being part of this important conversation on food security, equity, and ecological resilience in Hawaii. Please scan the QR code on the current slide to access our center's website, and we'll also be dropping a link to that website and other relevant links and reports in the Zoom chat throughout today's session. In addition, a YouTube recording of today's webinar will be sent out to our MailChimp subscriber list after the event, along with a recap, highlights, and a preview of our upcoming webinar event for November, which is going to be on our upcoming Food System Summit. If you'd like to subscribe to our newsletter, please email me at kalemau@hawaii.edu to be signed up. A little bit about the center. The Kale Mouse Center for Sustainable Island Food Systems is an initiative of the University of Hawaii System, co-directed by Dr. Noah Lincoln and Dr. Albie Miles. Our mission is to uplift food system transformation across Hawaii by supporting food security and justice, ecological sustainability, education, storytelling, policy, cross-sector collaboration, and community partnerships. And the series was created because we found across Hawaii, food system work is dynamic and creative and impactful, but it's often siloed. So the Brown Bag Speaker Series exists to bridge those gaps and share stories from the field, as well as building alignment around the most pressing issues facing Hawaii's food future. Our long-term vision is to really understand how the UH system can best support food system transformation in service to the people and the Aina of Hawaii. And some of our broader work, the Kale Mouse Center engages in applied research and policy analysis, community-based education and convenings, cross-sector partnerships linking academia and practitioners. And by convening voices from agriculture, policy, and community, we seek to really just gather and strengthen Hawaii's path toward food sovereignty and ecological balance. Today's topic and format: each of our speakers will share concise presentations from their unique organizational and community perspectives. And I want to remind the audience that the Zoom Q&A feature is what we're using for questions. So please submit questions at any time and we'll address them as we can. If we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email. So today's topic is Breaking Bottlenecks, the Future of Meat Processing in Hawaii. And just to sort of frame and ground this, today's session examines the structural and logistical bottlenecks in Hawaii's meat processing system, which is a key but often hidden element in our local food security. According to the Hawaii Livestock Harvesting Master Plan 2022, local grass-fed beef makes up about 7 to 9% of the market, with pork coming in under 1%. Limited slaughter capacity, inspection barriers, and infrastructure costs create a harvest bottleneck that challenges ranchers, consumers, and policymakers alike. And at the same time, the Targeted Grazing Handbook of 2006 and the recent research from 2025 in Science magazine emphasize that managed grazing can reduce wildfire risk, manage invasive grasses, and restore rangeland health. So today we're going to connect those threads, asking how can expanding processing capacity also strengthen ecological stewardship and community resilience? Hawaii's livestock industry has shifted dramatically over the past 50 years from local harvest and consumption to exporting live cattle and importing finished meat. So some of the key challenges we found include underutilized local facilities and high operational costs, limited cold storage and slaughter slots for small ranchers, and some of the opportunities on the horizon include cooperative and producer-owned facilities that share risk and access, and mobile or modular slaughter units for remote areas. So today we're honored to welcome our distinguished speakers, each bringing a vital perspective to this discussion. We have Bryan Mayer, educational specialist and instructor, Culinary Institute of the Pacific. He's an educator and nationally recognized butcher who teaches at the Culinary Institute, and he has extensive experience in humane slaughter, craft butchery, and he also helps bridge the gap between producers, processors, and consumers through education and workforce training. We also have Raia Olsen, co-founder and manager, Oʻahu Grazers Cooperative. She leads a co-op that mobilizes livestock for vegetation management, wildfire prevention, and ecosystem restoration. And her work highlights how grazing can serve as both a food system strategy and a land stewardship practice. And finally, we have Micah Richards, meat negotiant and owner, Mauka Meats LLC. He operates one of Hawaii's few local slaughter and processing facilities, working directly with ranchers to expand access and explore opportunities in alternative meats and invasive species processing. So with that, I would like to welcome Bryan.
Hi, how are you? Aloha. Thanks for having me.
Aloha. There you go. I had to get my screen so you could share. Okay, you can kick it off. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for Micah and Raia for being here. I think this is an absolutely important conversation and something that I think we're all extremely passionate about, and I hope that those tuning in feel equally passionate about. I mean, we all like to eat. We all love the land that we're living on. We all want to remain here. And I think some of the things that we're going to talk about today and the practices that we all share are sort of surrounded in improving land, improving health, and improving our communities. So again, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And yeah. Should I talk a little bit about my background?
Yeah, if you could just introduce
sure.
folks what your background is, what you do, and give us like a like a good overview of what does this landscape look like, particularly in Hawaii, in agriculture, animal agriculture, in the current state.
Ooh, okay. How much time do we have? No, I've been here in Hawaii since 2018. I was brought over by one of the founders, Jack Patel of Kanoa Cattle Company. I had met him back in 2015 on the continent. I'm originally from the East Coast. Spent about 20 years or so, sort of at the genesis of what we call the craft butcher movement, which was sort of a return, at least here in the United States, to sort of some old world practices, bringing back the craft and the artistry of butchery that had sort of somewhat been lost again here in the continent, in the continental United States. Sort of bringing back those old world methods, acting as a proxy for farmers, really creating a lexicon around what this whole sort of for lack of a better term, good food movement, good meat movement was and now is. So we kind of existed in this space, before terms like sustainable agriculture and certainly before the regenerative ag. Happened to be at the right place at the right time and trained a lot of butchers, a lot of chefs, helped people open up shops, again, created this language around what sort of accessible, good meat could be. Owned a restaurant, I've consulted with farmers, so really been involved with everything that entails getting meat on the plate of consumers, whether it be in a restaurant, whether it be at their home. Yeah. So, the current state or where we are right now really revolves around two things, I think, lack of capacity for slaughter and processing, and how do we grow our industry here? How do we entice folks to get into farming? How do we support those that are already doing it from a livestock perspective? We've got some unique challenges here, but I think some of those challenges are an asset as well. And so I think what we're looking at doing is looking at the current state of where we are in terms of production. And so that's cattle, that's hogs, that's sheep and goat. We'll leave poultry for a whole other conversation, and dairy is a whole other sort of thing. So we'll just focus on those things. And so when you look at the landscape here, about, I don't know what the numbers are, Micah and Raia, you may be able to correct me, but we're looking at maybe somewhere around 90% on Oʻahu and 100% or 99% or something like that, or reverse that, about 99% or something like that on Oʻahu, maybe 90% for the entire state, slaughter processing controlled by one institution, which is frightening, and it's caused a bunch of bottlenecks, some understandable from an economic standpoint, but also from a sort of an equitable standpoint in terms of supporting the local food community, supporting local infrastructure. We need to open up those bottlenecks. We need to create more processing. We need to create more slaughter. We need more education, not just from the consumer standpoint, right, but also education from a workforce development standpoint. And so from that, what we're looking to do, specifically here on Oʻahu, is to grow an industry around sheep and goat, and Raia can expand upon that a little more, that supports solar grazing, it supports mitigation of fire through the grazing, and also controls invasive flora. Sheep and goat can consume things that are sometimes toxic to cattle. But in order to do that, we need to give folks a reason to either start, grow, and expand their operations. And right now, if you're a sheep and goat producer on Oʻahu, there's no access to slaughter processing capacity, which leaves folks like Raia the only option to ship off island, which can be detrimental and is not great for the health of these animals. We'd like to keep them here on island and not have to ship them around. So that's kind of the current state of things. And I'll turn it over to Micah if he wants to kind of expand upon that. We can talk a little bit about what's happening in the cattle industry here. I think we've got the confluence of multiple things. We've got drought-like conditions here, in state, but also, we're 20, 30 years now, probably never coming back from the drought-like conditions that we see on the continent. But we've had a robust industry here of sending stockers and feeders to the continent. Part of the mission when I was at Kanoa was to not remove that, right? That's a great source of income, revenue for farmers and ranchers. But how do we entice ranchers and farmers to keep some of that here, to keep our stocks plentiful here, as opposed to sending everything to the continent and then having to import that back in? So you've got that need, right? And, record prices for those animals. And then, of course, lack of capacity, which is always going to be the issue. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just if we could get a couple more minutes with you, just looking at from like a regenerative perspective, what do you think a resilient, equitable sort of, processing system actually looks like in Hawaii right now?
Well, I think first of all, there needs to be access, right? And so we don't have that. Now, what that model can be is really anything, right? And that's what we're looking at. I know, there's talk of co-ops and there's talk of privately owned facilities. I think whatever that structure is, it needs to be profitable, right? But we also need to look at this as what it actually is, which is a public service, right? Like farming and ranching, the production of food is really a public service. And I think we need partnerships with government, right, to look at ways of funding these things. Yeah.
Great. And
sort of public-private partnerships.
Right. And how do you think that like the regenerative verification frameworks, land to market, how does that help with connecting producers, processors, consumers? How does that function?
Well, I think that's beneficial, right? Certainly, and if you're speaking of like things like land to market, through the Savory Institute or something like that, or just in general, I think the more aggregation that we can have for smaller producers, and again, I'll let Micah and Raia speak on that because they're intimately knowledgeable on that subject. But the more aggregation we have, I think the better we can be, right? Like, so again, we are up against a commodity system, and I think that's what a lot of consumers don't understand, right? Is that like, you know, commodity cattle prices have increased drastically over the last few years, but you still look at things like pork and things like chicken. There's a huge divide, right, between what a commodity price is, what you see in the supermarket, versus what you would see locally grown and raised. And I think consumers need to understand that that's because of this commodity system, that subsidies are paid, right? And those prices are artificially low. So it's an apples to orange just comparison. But consumers are impacted by that at the point of sale. And so how do we mitigate against that? How do we correct for that? How do we educate consumers? How do we get folks in legislature on the same page in terms of the support that local ranchers and farmers need and local production needs?
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I was thinking, from a global perspective, is there any outside model from other regions that, I mean, nothing could be adapted perfectly, right? I mean, everything is dictated specifically by place, but is there any
Sure.
other systems that you've seen that kind of can be a model, or, something like a framework for adapting to improving Hawaii's meat processing?
Yeah, I think Hawaii has a unique set of circumstances, and I think those circumstances are all beneficial. We've got you can not, when we're not under drought conditions, right? We've got the ability to graze year long. So I'm hesitant to say that there's a global sort of model for adaptation. Is I think that global feeding the world mentality has kind of gotten us into the position that we're in. And I think we need to think a lot more on a micro level, a lot more inward in terms of like how to produce. Again, our main bottleneck right now is the cost, right? The cost of doing this type of business and the lack of capacity. And those are two problems that we need to solve for, that we are attempting to solve for right now. Yeah.
Mahalo. Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into hearing from Micah.
Sorry, Sean. I thought Raia was going to go first before me.
Oh, I apologize. You're right. We do have Raia coming up next. I got thrown off. Raia.
Okay, so I can go ahead and share my screen, yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. I have, sorry, here we go. Okay, I have a short, hopefully a short, quick little presentation. I am coming in with everybody not maybe understanding exactly what prescribed grazing is. So I'm gonna just do a quick little example so we can all have something to come back on. So I'm with Oʻahu Grazers, and my name is Raia Olsen. I was born and raised here on the North Shore, graduated from Kahuku, so I've been here my whole life. My husband's from Wyoming, so he brought a little bit more of the cattle background. We raise cattle and over 1,000 head of sheep. And we graze mostly solar sites where we're contracted to manage vegetation. And we've started doing some prescribed grazing projects. So today I'm mostly speaking on the grazing invasive wildfire management section of our discussion. So what is prescribed grazing? So it's a controlled use of livestock to manage the amount, timing, and intensity of grazing to meet specific vegetation or resource management goals. So there's a lot in this little definition, and we'll kind of break it down a little bit, but the beginning part is that we need to focus on is our goals, so specific vegetation goals or resource management goals. We're gonna break it down a little bit here. So the first part is the planning. So we want to base it on goals. Are we going to be doing fuel reduction? Are we just trying to improve the forage Are we trying to control and manage invasives? Are we building more soil health? There's a lot of different, are we trying to kill the forage in that area? There's a lot of different things that we would have a goal for. So you're going to graze differently and use different species according to what our goal is. Timing is very important part. So we're going to time when and when we add animals, how many we add of those animals we add, when we're going to remove those animals, what time of year, the season that we're going to graze in has a big impact. The vegetation growth phase, so just the season and timing of what the vegetation is at in their growth phase is going to make a difference on the efficiency of the animals grazing, on the herd health of the animal, and the landscape rest. So resting periods on these landscapes is really important, and the timing of when and how long, when we come back and graze after that rest period is all important. Stocking rate is all about balance. So we want to have the right enough mouths to manage vegetation, but not so many that the grass isn't able to recover. The goal is to match the number of the animals to the amount of available forage so the plants can recover and the animals still get their nutritional needs. Rest and recovery is the next piece, and this is is a really important part of prescribed grazing. It's allowing pastures and plants to be able to grow back or recover. Some of us may have a lot more experience on Big Island and Maui where there's a lot of invasive ungulates, and those landscapes are experiencing a lot of erosion, and that's due to no rest and no recovery. So we can help landscapes with using animals, but we can also really cause damage. And the key piece here is the managing with fences and the recovery period on these places. And then the monitoring. So this is where I think collaboration or where producers and institutions can unite. Tracking vegetation, animal condition, that's a lot of what producers do normally, but now we're adding in a level of we need to have more support and more data. Everybody wants to see the data. Producers aren't really great at tracking that part, especially when you're wanting forage samples or soil samples and photos. That's the hardest thing for me, is to remember to get a photo before and after in the same spot so you can see it when you're looking at it side by side. This is things that I can see other institutions or students doing research studies and things on ground, and it would be really supportive. So essentially, we call it prescribed grazing because we're actually giving a prescription for that specific landscape. We're taking in, it's not just one size fits all everywhere. We're taking into account all these things for that specific landscape and giving basically a little prescription of how many animals, how long we're going to graze. And sometimes we don't know, not sometimes, for the most part, we aren't going to know exactly how long it's going to take because we have so many microclimates throughout our islands. Even on one island, a few miles apart, it'll be significantly different. So we can have an idea, but trying to get it exactly right is not exactly there. So for example, we have too many animals that we're grazing for too long of a period with little to no rest. We're going to get overgrazing, soil erosion, and poor regrowth. That's something that we don't want to do. But we also don't want to put too few of animals with a short grazing period and too long of a rest. Now we've got wasted forage, we've got old grass that's losing its quality in nutrition and also palatability. So nobody's really going to want to come back and eat this really old, gray, mature grass that also isn't really doing much for your animal, and is going to turn into a fire risk and get overgrown. So too much and too little aren't good things. We got to find this balance. So how does prescribed grazing going to help? Well, it helps with reducing wildfire risk, builds resilient landscapes, and supports biodiversity and soil health. So reducing wildfire risk. We do this by creating strategic fire breaks or green breaks. So we're going to graze the animals in specific areas. Fire breaks are really important for slowing fires down, for providing access for firefighters to get in to another location of the fire to fight it. It also provides another safe area for them to get out of. They are going to graze in compact grasses under their feet. They're going to graze the fine fuels and ladder fuels. Ladder fuels is a vegetation that grows in like a vertical path from the ground up into the trees, and that provides a path for flames to be able to move upward from the surface. And that causes higher higher fires. And so now we've got if we can graze and break up the continuity of these grasses and vines and trees, we can start to limit and maybe help the firefighters have a little easier time. We can avoid having high fires way up high because we're cutting up the ladder fuels. It also helps the fires to maybe not spread as quickly because there's not as much pathways everywhere and on top and going crazy. We can slow things down because a lot of the finer fuels underneath the trees are eaten and cleaned up and gone. So we create conditions for less intense fires that are more manageable, and otherwise they would cause worse damage when they burn super hot and intense. Okay, so we can build resilient landscapes. I want you just to kind of pay attention to this picture. We're going to go over it a little bit later, but just kind of have what this in your mind as we go through the next slides. But prescribed grazing helps build resilient landscapes. Now, we're not going to build fire-proof landscapes, right? Fires are going to happen probably everywhere that we can try to avoid is going to be helpful, but we can build resilient landscapes. And each of us is really, this is our responsibility to do this. But this is done by prescribed grazing, with them grazing the fine fuels that we just talked about underneath the canopy in the trees. It breaks up that fuel continuity. It increases soil organic matter, which then strengthens ecosystems' abilities to resist and recover from fire. So these fires may not have burned as hot, which is when it gets really hot, it kills everything in the soil. So it has a chance to recover, because fire, we also know, is part of our ecosystem's processes that it has to protect itself. It's part of nature, but these hot burning out of control fires are damaging our ecosystems where they're having a difficult time recovering. So prescribed grazing in a way also mimics the historical relationship between large herbivores and natural fire. In the wild, big herds would graze through places, but they were moved. They didn't just stay in one place and have a fence keeping them there. They were moving constantly, and they were moving from predator pressure. So there's an important part to all the different pieces of these systems. We don't have fenceless areas for these herbivores to graze. We don't have these predators that are going to put the right kind of pressure on. So we have to recreate that, and we can do that with prescribed grazing. Prescribed grazing also supports healthy soils. So they're going to graze and they're going to naturally poop and pee behind them. Whatever they don't graze, they're going to step on with their feet. They're going to lay down on it. It's going to get broken down and eventually adds the organic matter down into the soils. This supports biodiversity, and it increases the organic matter, which increases soil moisture, the ability to retain more water. These things are important because if the ground is a little cooler or has moisture in it, then we can also slow down fires. There have been firefighters who've gone out to fight and have told me that they can't like physically see the fire, and then they look down and their boots are literally melting. So the ground is so hot and it's burning, and it will reignite fires, right? So if we can keep soil cooler with water retention, then we're also another tool there trying to help. Their hooves are pointy. They're made to like just walk through the ground and aerate the soil, breaking up the topsoil so that it can absorb water when we do have a lot of rain. So now we can slow down erosion. We can slow down water just running and taking the topsoil down into our oceans and rivers. The ground can maybe absorb it and use it and not just lose it. But it can't do that if it's so compacted and hard that it's not able to absorb into the ground. With more healthy soils, we can also have more diverse root systems. These systems also help, more roots in the ground also help to hold water retention, and they also help to hold bare ground together. So now it's another way to help reduce erosion. Okay, so that picture I told you to pay attention to earlier, this is the before. You were actually looking at our after. And this was a little project that we have done earlier this year. This is about almost 4 acres. And you can see there's houses all around. And here is all side by side. So this number 1, that was the before picture. I had hired a drone photographer to come take these pictures, so I knew they were mine. So this is their before. This was about 4 or 5 days into the grazing, and then this bottom here is after. I don't know, it's kind of stretched out if you can see it well on your screen. There's a little more down here. But you can see that there's way less brush and trees. This is all halekoa. A lot of guinea grass, lots of halekoa. Then there's some trees, these canopy trees. We want canopy trees. Actually, you can see the sheep down in here. We want canopy trees in our systems because those create shade, and shade creates cooler soil. We can actually have vegetation under there. So if you're running like an actual pasture management, you want to have some trees in your area for your animals. Sheep and goats and cattle are susceptible to heat stress. So we don't want them out baking, but we don't want our soils baking either. So this is up close. This is the section here that we're going to be looking at right behind these houses. So day 1, this is all halekoa. This is very thick. This homeowner actually let us put our fence right through their yard because she said she specifically wanted this halekoa to get grazed because she's paid a ton of money to have it like cut down, and it's really difficult. This is also all rocks. So this is day 5. And then day 9, and this is up close down the bottom. We're back to, I'm not great at remembering when to take pictures and where. But you can see that it was cleared out. This is all rocks. It's all manual clearing that would have had to been done. And halekoa is invasive, but it's also actually a really good feed. So a lot of the invasive plants are good feeds for our animals. It has a good nutrition. They love to eat it. But they grow crazy and thrive here in our islands. So some of the struggles that we see and experience, experienced is labor. So number 1 would definitely, number 1 is the slaughterhouse and having access to getting our animals that we are pumping grass into to actual market. So that's really difficult. And then the second one would be labor. I've only done this prescribed grazing kind of as a small scale because of the lack of labor and workforce that is, 1, willing to do this work and willing to get educated, or even just having some education. And then just getting contracts, so getting institutions and landowners to buy into it. Everyone that hires us or is thinking about it, everybody wants to try it out. They got to see if it works. Like, all of a sudden, sheep and goats are going to decide not to eat grass that day at that location. I don't know, but we all have to try it and do a pilot program. They're going to keep eating, I promise. And then a struggle would be for somebody who's starting out, like getting equipment. It took us a while to get equipment gathered. We got to have portable pens to be able to catch. We got to have portable waters for the most part. We got portable fencing systems, trailers and trucks. But that is where somewhere we could look at building a co-op group. Maybe some of this equipment could be shared, or someone has a truck and trailer and they're willing to be hired to haul, and they're just hauling every day. There's so many ways that we can make this work if we can get the right people at the table to figure it out. Another issue can be, where do these grazing animals go during their off season or in between contracts? I know a lot of groups have done some grazing projects like this on outer islands, and then they struggle to try to put their animals somewhere. This is where there's a unique situation with solar sites. So nobody really loves solar farms. We don't want more solar, but it's coming, right? And so we've just got to turn this into something that's going to benefit us. And it's actually brilliant, I think, having solar sites that you can pull sheep and, well, not goats, you can't graze goats on solar, pulling sheep off of the solar site to go and do a grazing job and then putting them back in there. So now we don't have to worry about trying to have another place that you have to lease consistently, because you might run out of jobs or you might not have enough feed at one project. We can just stick them back on the solar site. There's more than enough grass on them sites. And the other one is staying up on the herd health management and understanding that there is still a level of herd health that you got to keep up. We're not just, you can't just pump livestock constantly through this old, brushy, mature grass and expect them to have a product that then is ready for Micah to turn around and sell. That's not going to work. You need to be able to supplement them and balance when needed, or understand what type of animal you're going to use to graze. Probably not going to be grazing pregnant ewes on, or pregnant mother sheep on mature old dry grass, because we got to clear it. You're going to use a different animal, but you can also still graze it and feed them a little bit of grain or hay to help supplement, and they'll still go out and graze that other stuff. But if whatever they're not eating, they're still walking on it and breaking it down. Um, let's see. And I think that's it in a nutshell. So if we have any other questions, we can go to that.
Yeah, I encourage folks, please start asking some questions, but I have a ton of questions myself too, Raia. Thank you so much. That was, I have very limited understanding, knowledge of how this is all working, but to me, this is fascinating. This is like, it just seems like, you know, when you look at systems, the best systems in complete actual systems are ones that all, you know, connect, and there's benefits that are like multiple benefits for everybody involved in this. So it's just kind of mind-blowing to me that the, you know, that the state wouldn't really push for doing things to create partnerships where, I mean, just the fire mitigation alone, like what do you see as being that major obstacle right now in getting folks, you know, at the state level to buy into this and start helping create some sort of a program where this is funded and adopted?
I think one is getting their attention to know that it's available and that is an option. I still think it's still pretty new, at least not, definitely not on the mainland, but still new to our islands, to where they're starting to realize like, oh, this is an option. And then yeah, the buy-in, I think we're gonna have to continue doing some pilot projects and trying it out. I think that's where having well, me just getting better at it, but also just having access or assistance from institutions that maybe want to push this and have the funds to and the help to be able to do it, and do it at a level of what more state and government institutions will understand and be able to relate to. They're going to relate to numbers and analysis and data a lot better than I am. I can see it in the pasture, but they're not going to be able to see it and understand it, you know? So finding a spot in the middle that talks to both sides, I think is and then can prove to it without having to constantly just graze, for an example. I think also, like, for landowners, you know, I mean, if you're a landowner, you maybe you don't love this, but an incentive for them to choose this as an option, right? In California, you have a limited time frame to get your property managed before fire season comes. We don't really have a fire season now, right? It's just all the time season. It's not when fire season starts, it's if it's starting. Um, and so getting incentives for large landowners to use this above mowing, above spraying, above just leaving it alone and causing more fire. I don't know what that would look like, whether it's a, you know, a credit of some sort or whatever, but just some things like that so that they want to choose this. It's also solar sites that are built on different ag lands, and they, you know, they need to use some type of ag operation on their site. So they try to. Not all the sites are on ag land. So, you know, looking at that, there's a lot of different things I think we could start to come up with as we like plan, just brainstorm. Yeah.
Right, like policy for allowing, exemptions for grazing on not technically ag land for limited periods of time, things like that. Perhaps, I don't know, but like looking at when you're creating these prescriptions, putting all this data together, what is the cost, difference between like paying for having you folks bring cattle out to graze versus having folks running equipment and just chopping stuff down and managing it that way, like manually labor wise? Is there a huge difference in cost, or are they relatively similar?
That's a great question. And honestly, I haven't had enough experience with the mechanical side where they won't tell me what they charge. But I do know from just different people's bids, like the Laukahi Park, they looked at getting a fire break on one side of the houses, and it was going to be it was a 10 or 20-foot break off of the houses, and for as long as the parcel was, and she was quoted like, I think it was like $10,000 for that, and that was just a strip, whereas we grazed the whole thing. Granted, it doesn't look like a mowed front yard, right? This is going to be raw, natural, but what it is going to do is clear out a lot of the thick, brushy. I mean, if you've ever weed whacked wet grass, you know that that's not fun. Same with dry grass, you're still going to get splinters and everything. And if you can throw in some animals, do it, and then you're coming in behind and just, you know, just doing a slight cleanup, or now it's cleared out enough that you could bring a machine in and you're not going to be running over rocks or big stumps and breaking your machine and causing a huge extra. A lot of these mechanical businesses, they're going to incorporate that their machine's going to break down, right? And it's going to cost them a lot. So they're planning for that. And if they're looking at something that's dense and thick, then they're thinking, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. It's way too risky. Well, if they can look and see where the trees are, where the rocks are, they can move the rocks, they could, clear it, and they can get through easier. It's going to be a lot less risky, so cheaper. We I know grazing is cheaper. I don't know how much cheaper, but we can also graze a bigger area versus mowing, or with a brush hog or whatever it is, acres and acres and acres. That's not sustainable. And hillsides, rocky terrain, you're never going to get mechanical in there, so people are going to spray, and we've got to get away from spraying in any way that we can. Just the leaching in the ground that it does and causes, and what's going to come back after is just weeds, and then nobody wants to eat that. Not even the sheep and goats are going to eat that, so that gets a lot more difficult to manage. So I know it is cheaper to do sheep and goats. I just don't know exactly how
Yeah,
much.
well, and while it's not as maybe as pretty as just cutting things down, you can't really exchange that for what the ecological benefits are and soil improvement, organic matter enhancement, all of those things. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of I think the barriers are just in education and understanding and stuff. But thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
And
That
getting us
was
trained to accepting maybe not so exactly manicured areas. We just want fire fuels broken down, right? We don't necessarily need a perfect lawn if you were growing wildflowers and different things that were manageable, but now we're building yards that are going to support bees and butterflies and things like that. So you got to just decide, what is your goal? What are you trying to manage, and what are you managing for? And then we go according to what's going to work that way.
yeah. No, thank you so much. I want to make sure we get time for Micah. If we can shift over.
All right, I know we got 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try and speed run this. All right. My name is Micah Richards from Mauka Meats. Just a quick clarification from the earlier introduction. I do not own, though I wish I did, a USDA processor, though that is, of course, the dream and everything. But that's a dream that's going to cost like $15 million and everything. So not really in the future anytime soon, unless there's someone out there who's listening who wants to really help out with this. Just putting it out there. So what I do at Mauka Meats is really, the best explanation someone gave to me is that I'm an aggregator. We basically work with a bunch of the local livestock cooperatives across Big Island, Molokai, Maui, and Oʻahu. We work with, Raia is one of them. In fact, the only sheep producer that we really work with, along with Mountain View Farms over there in Waianae for pork. We also work with Molokai Livestock Cooperative, Hawaiʻi Meat Cooperative, a bunch of other USDA processors that we work with for local meats, and that's my company's whole thing is that we only work with local meats, nothing from the mainland, nothing from out of state, except for the ingredients, because hey, USDA compliance demands that I bring in things in from specific inspected facilities. So we work with about 25 plus livestock producers throughout the year, 2 local distributors, 5 food hubs. If you've probably seen us at Chef Zone or FarmLink. We also work with 2 health centers, the Kokokalihi Valley, as well as El Pao Services. That's part of Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Center. If anyone's on the west side, the Comp Center has a program that we do with them where it's 50% off if you use SNAP or EBT when purchasing any local meat products from us. We especially focus on families. And also, like, our whole big thing is really moving volume, because that's the economics of livestock, or, from, taking livestock, using pastures and grasslands, and actually making meat and getting things to people's plates. It's using marginal lands, like how Raia said, it's rocky landscapes, it's hills where you can't get a mower up, or it's very difficult to grow any other, to build a farm or anything. That's the best thing that livestock is used for using marginal grasslands, things that couldn't grow something else. To be able to produce food. And just processing animals, it is an economics of scale that really matters. When you slaughter an animal, you have to clear the whole animal. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. A cow is not just made of steaks. In fact, let's go to the next slide and I will show you. Out of an entire live 1,300 pound, maybe like a little bit better than the average cow that's around 1,300 pounds, you're only going to get 5% of that animal is steaks. Everybody's ribeyes and New York's tenderloins. That's about 70 pounds out of an entire animal carcass, but that's out of a 1,300 pound animal. This is probably one of the biggest things that I would ever push in front of any legislature, any Department of Health, Department of Ag, when it comes to actually planning things, is you have to look at the life of an animal, not just when they're on the pasture, but from the moment that they're born all the way to the moment that they expire, and anything that goes beyond that. It's not just the food product, it is the skin, the bones, the fat tissue, even skulls or anything, because everything's so expensive right now. This isn't how it is in the 80s or the 90s, where, $3 plate lunches were fed by 25-cent ground beef and everything. Back in the day when we used to actually process locally 30,000 to 50,000 head of beef cattle in the state. Now we only do about 10,000 animals in the entire state when it comes to beef. If you don't believe me, you can always just look it up for the USDA statistics. But that's kind of like the biggest issue. A lot of people don't understand the history that when we got cheap beef and access from places like Brazil, Argentina, and just on the mainland, just cheap feed from soy and corn and these other feeds, your time to be able to take an animal to a finished slaughter weight shrank from 3 years on grass down to about 1.5 years if you're just trying to feed them the health equivalent of French fries, essentially, to get them fat and ready for slaughter and processing. And that's why people, when trying to plan things out for our local processing, it shouldn't just be thinking like, I've got to get as much as I can for myself. You're always going to be competing against the rest of the globe, even with the tariffs from the current administration, but you're also competing against basically the equivalent of cheap beef from Texas, from feedlots in Oregon or California. And right now, I think a lot of people don't understand locally is that we have a huge shortage on beef because there's just not enough grass finished animals anymore. Ever since COVID and the constant herd rebuilding, most ranchers over here take the most consistent route for income, and that's selling their calves to feedlots through brokers on the mainland. because currently they're getting record prices, and you can't blame a rancher for that. You've got, just like anybody else, everyone's got jobs, you've got rent to pay, bills, food to put on the table. And if you have to make a decision between, I can sell my calf for record high prices right now after they've been born within 6 to 8 months and get paid relatively quickly, or I can take a chance to raise a beef animal where I'm going to get about $1,600 for it from the processor, but that may take me about 3 years. And if I miss a certain mark, like if I go beyond 30 months, then suddenly I may get penalized because I'm no longer qualifying for certain different categories. This is kind of the big trade-off that a lot of livestock producers have over here, is that, you want to secure your income. Even guys who want to produce their cattle to have for that pride to make, and they can make really great grass finished animals locally over here. Economics will always demand for a family that they try and take care of themselves. And so trying to create pathways so that people can get paid better, while also doing this balancing act where you want to pay the rancher and their livestock producers well, but you also want to make sure that you keep things affordable on the back end for the family who's actually got to be buying this in the grocery store. This is the constant balancing act. Being the guy in the middle, I have to see it on both sides. We have a litany of issues, and a lot of it's from the fact that since the 80s and the 90s, we've just lost a lot of producers, processors. I believe Oʻahu used to have about 7 to 8 different USDA processors, and now we're down to pretty much one company that has all of it. Nothing wrong with that, but the thing is, their economics, I understand. They have to focus on beef cattle, because if you can take a look at this, in the time that it takes for you to process a carcass and get this all cut up to produce out of a 1,300-pound animal, about half of that would be edible product, around 630 pounds. You could do 4 Raia sheep at maybe have them dressing out at 65 pounds, but you're only going to get about 200 to 220 pounds of edible product. That's why part of it you need support from the state, and you need specialized facilities that actually focus, which is what Raia and Bryan are pushing for, is you have facilities that are actually focused on small animals to be able to get the economics of scale to make sure things are affordable. This is why I think our state is in a great position. I know we all harp about tourism, but if I can sell a $50 steak plate to a tourist who's here and wanting to have the best thing that he can have, so that I can keep ground beef prices cheaper for families, that's what you do. You try and figure out different ways to maximize profits on one side to feed purpose on the other. But this is the constant thing that you have to do, and it takes a huge team. It's not just Raia over there, the producer. It's people like Bryan who are at CIP training guys so that they can actually look at an animal, and despite the quality, they can maximize that animal so that they can basically generate more economic activity to pay for more taxes, to pay for more programs like these. You have to have everybody working together. You need Department of Health, because currently we mostly have all of our inspectors are focused on food establishments for restaurants. I know the Department of Health is trying to make specialized teams for the manufacturing side, but that disconnect between restaurant versus the kind of safety features that I need in a manufacturing facility are completely different. Same thing for Department of Ag. Biosecurity controls are important. That's why New Zealand is so successful, is because they're constantly trying to prevent anything that come in and damage their pasture lands or damage their agricultural industry. Right now, we have things like, as much as everybody hears about coconut rhinoceros beetle right now and little fire ants, there's two-line spittle bug devastating low-lying pasture lands and everything, which if we lose feed, if we lose pasture lands and good soils, we can't have a livestock industry. That's what crushed Molokai right now. They don't have a livestock industry anymore, because with the double whammy of droughts and deer getting into their pasture lands and damaging their carrying capacity, we've basically had to work with them to focus more of their programs on trying to process venison and create agricultural products based on that, in order to basically keep paying everybody's payroll. This is kind of the thing. And the thing is, as much as I know we're all trying things, we need to try things faster and harder, because it's just not enough time. We keep losing processors, we keep losing producers. This is a thankless job of meat, and you are expected to basically make it as cheap as possible for families. while still making sure that there's room for a 50% margin for any grocery store to mark things up as. And so that's why, like, I'm the man in the middle, just trying to play this balancing act. It's tough. So it's not just Department of Ag, it's also like being able to give them the budget so that they can, and the teeth to penalize people for bad ag practices, because that's the other thing too. Like right now, I don't know what's going on with biosecurity. I definitely know that there is no requirement for incoming cargo facility and everything for plants or anything. That's how we got rapid ohia death, basically devastating through native forests right now, is because of the constant import and lack of inspectors. And when you only have less than a dozen inspectors across the entire state, you can't expect them to be able to hit the thousands of cargo containers that are coming in constantly. It just requires, there's no one thing that could be done to be maximized. You have to take a holistic approach and try and do everything. So that's it. And just as an example, like inside, honestly, I wouldn't say I did this thing really, really fast. It's just like, we used to have, it's easier for me to find data from like the 1950s agricultural like statistics books than it is like now from our ag department, because they lack funding to be able to like get reporting. They have to basically use the USDA numbers in order to do a lot of their reporting, because we just don't have enough people. And same thing, we need to be supporting 4-H programs to get more kids interested in agriculture, because they're your future workers and everything getting inside there. And also just teaching people work in food service doesn't mean you always have to be a line cook. You can easily go switch over to compliance and food manufacturing. There are career pathways. Like if we're going to do this, we need help from the state, because the feds aren't going to do anything right now. We're still in a government shutdown. And with this current administration, I'm not afraid to say, like, we are going to be stuck right now for the next 4 years of barely any help from the federal level. So we have to focus on what we can do as a state and just get it done. Like it is a constant struggle of both economics and just the carrying capacity. People from all teams got to come together on this. And all right, I'm sorry. That's 3 minutes left for this whole presentation.
No, that's fine. That's great. Thank you. Sorry we whittled your time down a little bit, Micah, but thank you for fitting all of that into, to a very concise, very informative presentation. From our perspective, in the university system, one of the things that comes to mind, and I don't know if this is an idea that makes sense, but we're looking at ways to, like, how can we support you best? Is there anything that you're looking at with, graduate studies programs where, because to me, that's what I'm looking at. That's how some data can be collected, right? Like, is there room in anybody's operations to have
I
graduate
need
students
guys trained in compliance. I need people trained in everything. I need an apprenticeship program, and I keep yelling at Bryan to please start a union and everything for meat processing and everything. Because even if you have a certification program, if a kid gets trained and goes to class, but doesn't realize what kind of a breakneck day he's expected to do and everything, I would rather have a guy who's willing and hardworking, who comes into the line and willing and open to work, and then train him on all the other stuff afterwards, because I can't train initiative. I can't train that stick-to-itness and everything. And then and then to be able to link into a distributor, you need to have specification sheets and all these other things so that, you can lock into Fresh Island Fish, Chef's Zone, Waihata and everything, and basically make sure that everything's always coming in, because a hotel, like restaurants, hotels, everybody in the industry wants local product. But if you can't get past the compliance hurdles, especially for food manufacturing, like I need a certification program for HACCP, PARPC, PCQI. I need it done locally and affordably, and not just bringing in consultants, but just regular programs at community colleges and things like that. That way I have a ready supply of guys here. And then I need unions and reps who can just tell me what I should be expected to pay, because I can't get funding if I don't understand what my costs are going to be for all these different programs. Only reason I know all this stuff is because I've walked this firing line and had to figure it all out as I go. So
I think, to Micah's point, we've got an incredible workforce here. I've been in not all the plants here, but we've got folks here that are trained, that are willing to learn. that want to do the work, and we just have to give it to them. Right. But this is not going to just, this can't just fall on the backs of consumers. Right. I think oftentimes we see like it's the consumers. We blame the consumers for all of this. Right. We're going to need institutions to really step up, and we're going to need our legislators to incentivize that. Right. Like we can't just expect people to do the right thing. Unfortunately, sometimes we got to help them along a little bit. So we're going to, like Micah was talking about, we're going to need hotels and resorts, right? We're going to need the DOE, right? We're going to need the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to help us grow this industry. There's a synergy between all of this. It's not just one factor, right? We're going to have to look at all of this to grow this industry.
A big thing I want to just bounce on that is just, it shouldn't be on consumers. That's kind of a cop-out always. The thing is, families, times are tough. They're going to flow towards basically the cheapest product that you're going to put in front of them that's going to make a meal. It's about pounds that they can get. So that's why you have to work with hotels, because if they can pay more, if the Four Seasons can pay more for product, I can keep my ground beef prices down.
Right.
So it's like they're always going to go that way. So that's why you should just make the walls or the economic incentives flow that way. And it's just about trying to remodel your system so that you can keep your fancy cuts at fancy prices and your family cuts at family prices.
Right. Well, in the interest of time, I apologize. We've run out of time, but I'm sure we probably could have done another hour on this topic. I encourage everybody to look into these things that, that connect with them, any kind of ideas folks can bring forward, and just want to thank you all again. I really appreciate your time and commitment in this industry, and thank you so much for joining us today.